The sexual exploitation of female slaves was a pervasive, systemic, and legally sanctioned reality in the Roman Empire. It was not an aberration, but a fundamental feature of a slaveholding society where enslaved people were considered property race under the absolute control of their master's domine. Legal framework, the foundation of exploitation. Roman law explicitly denied slaves legal personhood. Key principles enabled their exploitation. Property status. Slaves were chattel. A master's right to use his property as he saw fit. Dominica potestas implicitly included sexual use. Concubinage slaves could form de facto marriages, but these unions had no legal standing. The master could separate partners or sexually exploit one without legal recourse for the spouse. No protection from rape. There was no concept of rape stuprum or raptus of a slave by her master. The crime was seen as a violation of the master's property rights, not the woman's bodily autonomy. If another man raped a slave, the master could sue for property damage. Children followed the mother partus sequitur ventrum. Any child born to an enslaved woman was automatically a slave, increasing the master's wealth. This created a direct economic incentive for forced reproduction. Social and economic realities. Domestic service. Female slaves, ancilla, in households were directly exposed to the master and his male relatives. Exploitation was an ever-present threat and a common reality. Refusal could mean severe punishment, sale, or relegation to harder labor. Sexual slavery and prostitution. Masters could, and did, force enslaved women into prostitution. They could be made to work in brothels, lupaneria, or taverns tabernae, with all earnings going to the master. Some were hired out as companions. Concubinage, concubinatus, it was socially acceptable for a Roman man even if married to keep an enslaved woman as a long-term concubine. This was often a relationship of profound coercion, as the woman had no power to consent or refuse. While it could offer a slightly more stable existence, she remained property. Her children were slaves unless formally freed by the father. Favored slaves and manumission. Sexual exploitation could sometimes lead to manumission granting freedom. A master might free a woman he exploited, often in his will, and sometimes free the children they had together. This created a horrific carrot of potential freedom, binding the woman's fate to her exploiter's goodwill. The human cost and resistance. Psychological and physical trauma. The constant threat and reality of sexual violence were intrinsic to the enslaved condition. Sources like medical writer Serranus note the psychological distress of enslaved women, and laws indirectly reference slave infanticide, suggesting desperate acts of control over their own bodies. Limited avenues for resistance. Direct refusal was perilous. Resistance could take other forms. Feigning illness, seeking protection from the mistress domina who might intervene out of jealousy rather than compassion, or in extreme cases, flight or suicide. Moral criticism. A handful of voices like the Stoic philosopher Seneca criticized the abuse of slaves as morally degrading to the master, arguing for humane treatment. However, they did not challenge the institution itself, or the master's legal rights. A note on sources our understanding comes primarily from legal codes, for example, the Digest of Justinian, which coldly outline the rules. Literature and satire, for example, Petronius's Satyricon, which often treats the exploitation as a casual backdrop. Graffiti and epitaphs, which sometimes offer fleeting, heartbreaking glimpses of individual lives, like tombstones set up by masters for enslaved concubines they claimed to have. Loved papyri and letters, especially from Roman Egypt, documenting sales and everyday administrative records that normalized the practice. Conclusion. The sexual exploitation of enslaved women in Rome was not a hidden vice, but a cornerstone of the slave economy and patriarchal power. It was upheld by law, reinforced by social norms, and driven by economic incentives. It ensured the reproduction of the slave labor force and demonstrated the master's absolute dominance. For the enslaved woman, her body was not her own. It was a site of labor, reproduction, and coerced sexual service, with her survival often depending on navigating and enduring this perpetual violation.